Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. Tonight, I'm joined by Philip Moriello, who's a podcaster and a lawyer. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
So, just to start off, you're in California. You cover what happens in California. And what's interesting to me is California is always a state that is in the news because of the sheer size of it. But right now, California is in the news because they're pretty much leading on vaccine mandates. So just to start off, what is going on in California with vaccine mandates and actions by Governor Newsom?
Well, a lot of pushback is coming from the government regarding the vaccine mandates that they want a lot of people in the state are being required to be vaccine mandated. And they're also trying to push, and recently they almost tried to pass a bill that would have forced employers to have to force for vaccine mandates. That's been put on the back burner for now, but now that Gavin Newsom has survived the recall, it will most likely come up in the next legislative session and probably most likely be signed. So he's going to use the power of the government in Sacramento to force employers, private employers, to have to then enact these vaccine mandates, which, because they can't get it done on their own through a lot of legislative or legal processes, they figured out, well, we'll just kind of shoulder and put pressure on the private employers to do it on our own, on their own. And that way we can get more people vaccinated or force more people to get vaccinated.
And that's a really interesting point because the recall took up so much, I think, of the oxygen around discussing Gavin Newsom. And we had on someone who was running in the recall. We discussed that on this show. Would you say that Newsom was holding back on doing anything that was controversial or could drum up support for someone on the other side of the recall until it was over? Was he concerned about it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that he definitely was holding back, and I think that there was definitely talk amongst his inner circle that there were bills he wouldn't sign, that there was stuff he didn't want to come out on. He didn't want to say whether or not we'd go backwards on lockdowns or mask mandates. I think he in part kind of stayed away from that stuff because he knew there was a recall coming and the numbers were not in his favor about a month or two out. It was almost a dead heat. And then he started pulling away by using a Trump scare tactic method with Larry Elder, but that's a whole different story. The other thing that I tell a lot of my listeners is that he still has to face re-election next year. So I'm not sure if he's going to go full bore into a lot of stuff. He did just sign a slew of laws that I'm sure got national attention, including gender neutral toys, aisles in supermarkets, banning gas powered motors, as well as enforcing like ethnic studies in schools. So those are some things that are, I guess, I call them like feel good legislation. In the reality of things, they may not do so much and they may think they're doing good for California, but they don't really push the needle one way or another. But I think he'll probably push a little bit more, but not as much coming up because he does have a re-election to face.
And one thing we've heard is, I would say we people not in California, is that he has such overwhelming support for his way of handling COVID. The people are completely thrilled with what's happening. I've heard that many times on CNN and MSNBC. And I was wondering, I mean, if people in California are happy with how he's handled it, that's fine, that's their right. But do you see that? Do you see an overwhelming support for the way he's handled COVID throughout the over a year now?
Well, the interesting thing I see here on the ground, and I'm in San Diego. So San Diego is completely different than LA in the sense that San Diego, for the most part, is basically back to normal. There's no restrictions, there's no mask mandate. You're not required to wear a mask indoor or anything like that. But it seems like it's the vocal minority of those of LA and San Francisco. It's interesting as I'm watching the Dodgers and the Giants play last night. I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is a face off of the two who can most out COVID each other teams in California, because those two areas seem to be the most strict when it comes to COVID policies. They're the ones who are pushing, we need to lock down more, we need to implement masks, so we need to do X, Y, and Z. When in reality, I think most of the state is actually not crazy about how far Gavin Newsom is going with a lot of his controls. And that's why I think he's facing still a precarious road ahead with 2022, is that most of the states not necessarily on board with going back to mask mandates and vaccines and really strict COVID protocols. There are people in LA and San Francisco who, for some reason or another, just love the government telling them what to do and how to run their lives, and then using the government to tell other people how to run their lives because it's what they agree with. But that's just the statist mentality here in California that a lot of people subscribe to.
And that mentality, it seems to be sort of the mentality he's listening to. And you've mentioned some of the other bills he's been signing in the sort of feel good fluff for the Democrat base there. And so I was wondering, do you think that Democrats are seeing Gavin Newsom as a national leader, a leader that should be followed in how he behaves and the types of things he prioritizes? Because I know in New York, we're now seeing even more vaccine mandates. We're seeing efforts to get around religious exemptions that are coming down. So is Gavin Newsom leading the way for Democrats? Is that who Republicans should be looking at as someone who may be guiding the party right now rather than Biden?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, and this is sort of the good and the bad of the federalist experiment with allowing states to be the laboratories of this democracy, our constitutional republic, is that these states are trying out different mandates and ways of going about it. So you contrast like California and New York versus Texas and Florida, who are the absolute polar opposite.
Mhm.
South Dakota as well. South Dakota never really implemented any vaccine mandates or any COVID protocols. Um, but they are using people like Gavin Newsom and the governor of New York, the new governor of New York, who was not elected in, by the way, but that's a whole different issue, as sort of the laboratories of how far can we go with this and see if there's pushback, and how far can we go to see if people will really accept it. And I think that's sort of the same with California in general, is California always seems to push these kind of far leftist statist ideas and then see, will the rest of the country listen to them? Does
Right.
the rest of the country laugh at it? And it's sort of, that's sort of the testing ground. California always seems to be the canary in the coal mine when it comes to these far leftist statist ideas. So yeah, he is a leader in the Democratic Party, and the one thing that is scary is that now he survived his recall, and if he wins re-election, there's a good chance he's going to start looking at the White House come 2028.
Yeah, and that's terrifying. That should scare everybody a lot because Biden can become president without running a real campaign, really. I mean, why couldn't Gavin Newsom become president? And you've mentioned the fact that he's up for re-election. A lot of these vaccine mandates, they seem to be opposed by sheriffs and homeschooling parents and a lot of small businesses. Do you think in running for re-election, will there be any effort to sort of get in with those people to make it so that those people are not enraged by the fact that he's trying to mandate widespread vaccines for children and for customers and for employees? Or does he just not care about those categories of people anymore?
I think this is an issue with California politics in general, which is completely different than the national level of politics of Democrat versus Republican, and the sense that there is polarization, and the polarization is much more on one side or the other. And it becomes a tough situation. We have one of the largest amount of unaffiliated party preference voters, independent voters, as you would call
Right.
them, in the country, 25%, which shows you that there's a good chunk of voters who are not really happy with either side. And that shows that there's a messaging issue, either from the Republicans who are not getting those independent voters, or Democrats who have just lost those voters in all. But I mean, he does have the advantage that almost 50% of California is registered Democrat. And if you to win or beat him, you'd have to create this plurality of the independents, some moderate Democrats and Republicans. So he does have that sort of security, knowing he doesn't really have to listen to the other side. And we
Yeah.
saw that in 2018 when he ran. He just basically knew as soon as he got the Democratic nomination, he didn't want to debate. He didn't want to go on TV and have a
Right.
debate with John Cox. He was just fine with, I'll just kind of glide into my election victory and go into Sacramento. And I think that's really a problem, that there's no formidable opposition party here in California, which needs to be worked on.
I think that's true. And in some states, the Republicans are the other opposite of the opposition party. In some states, it's even smaller left-wing parties. It's certainly like that in Europe. And so you've mentioned the fact that there isn't real opposition to Newsom. So on a political level, I was wondering, because of these vaccine mandates, now they're going to be going into effect. Children to go to school are going to have them, and the other 10 immunizations. Could opposition to Newsom, in your view, come from parents? Is that a way forward for people who maybe have taken the vaccine or fine with it, but are not happy with the mandated thing? Because there are a lot of Americans who would take the vaccine but don't want anything mandated. Could we
Mhm.
be facing, instead of a red wave, a wave of parents who are just actively involved and upset?
Absolutely. I see it all the time. And I would say most of my followers and listeners are upset parents. And a lot of the groups that follow me or support me, one group that I've affectionately named them BAMs, which is Badass Moms. Um, those are the ones who are really, I feel like, on the front lines of pushing back against a lot of these mandates and a lot of these overreach policies. Um, But the one thing I always do tell them, and you brought up sheriffs and county boards and stuff like that, the one thing, if you want to really start to change California and you want to push back on Sacramento, is you have to change the local politics, because you can see such a difference with how one county can say, no, we're not going to lock down. Every business is essential. We're not listening to Gavin Newsom.
Right.
You can effectively insulate yourself from the craziness of Sacramento if you elect the right county board of supervisors, the right mayor, the right city council, and it comes down all the way to your school board. And I don't think before COVID, people really understood how much power these people have over your daily lives. And now they're starting to see it. And parents are waking up and they're going to school board meetings and they're getting engaged in the process, which is awesome, because now you're starting to see people really get engaged in the process that was set out for a reason, that we are supposed to be engaged in our government. It is a government for the people, by the people. You are representing us and listening to us. And now they're starting to make this connection. Wait, you mean politicians haven't been listening to us for how many years because we haven't been showing up? Yeah, that's what's happening. But now you're seeing parents who are on the forefront. They're pushing it, and they're the strongest voices. And it comes to mama bears and papa bears. Whenever you start to screw with their children and their cubs, they're going to push back, and they're going to push back with everything they got, and they don't care the consequences. So he has angered a lot of parents, and there's going to be a major pushback, and there already is a major pushback.
When you mention an effort to sort of insulate yourself from Gavin Newsom's policies, I think that's a really interesting strategy, because we often hear strategies surrounding getting Republicans elected, but not really insulate people being able to insulate themselves from the actions of statewide elected officials like Gavin Newsom. So in the cases of these school boards, obviously now we've seen Democrats try to protect the school board process and shut, I guess, conservative parents or independent parents out of those discussions. In terms of local coverage in California, I'm always interested in terms of local political coverage, local news. Are those stories about parents going to school boards and being upset and wanting to talk about mask mandates and vaccine mandates, are they hitting the local media in California the way that they've been hitting national media?
Oh, absolutely. There's definitely a number of local stations that do follow a lot of this stuff. Locally, we have a great independent news station called KUSI. They do a fantastic job following all this stuff and keeping abreast of it. Fox LA is another good one.
Mhm.
They stay on top of this stuff. So it is hitting the local news and it's hitting the local networks. And I think people are seeing it. The question is whether people are tuning into it. There is a lot of mischaracterization of what's going on at these board meetings. Like, for example, there was something like 14 hours of testimony at one San Diego County Board of Supervisors meeting. But comedians like Stephen Colbert picked the one guy with dreadlocks who's screaming like a heavy metal singer and put him out there and say, this is what we're up against. And
Right.
it's the scare tactics of polarizing, further removing each other from having a civil discussion, instead of just saying, hey, maybe I agree with these people who are upset about these pushbacks or these tactics or these policies. Instead, it's all fear mongering and scare tactics, which is essentially what they did in the recent recall election. Is all scare tactics. You know, these are all Trumpers. They're all anti-vaxxers. They're coming to kill you. Larry Elder doesn't believe in vaccines. He wants to remove it. He wants to make it Florida, where people are dying in the street. So that's their go-to card. When they can't win on the actual substance of the argument, it always goes to scare tactics, and it always goes to that fear mongering.
Mhm. And that's an interesting point about Larry Elder, that people, I think, don't realize how nasty it got, because a lot of people
Mhm.
think because Newsom won by such a large margin that it was never nasty, that everything was fine. And it was quite brutal at one point. There were a lot of scare tactics. I saw Newsom at one rally say, this is the closest you're going to get to Trump in California. So in terms of the recall effort, do you think there was ever a chance at recalling Gavin Newsom? Could there have been a stronger candidate, or was it always going to go this way because, like you said, they have the Trump scare card in their back pocket?
Yeah, I knew this was going to happen before Larry Elder jumped into the race, and a lot of the candidates had done a very good job of sort of keeping Trump at arm's length, especially in
Mhm.
debates. They had asked him, if he runs
Yes.
in 2024, are you going to vote for Trump? Are you going to support him? They tried to get him on those gotcha questions. But Larry Elder, great candidate. I saw him speak in person, incredible charisma, had the room on its feet the entire time. However, he was the candidate that Gavin Newsom was waiting for. He was the Trump candidate that he
Mhm.
was waiting for. And he knew that he could go immediately into attacking him, showing a picture of him with thumbs up with Trump,
Right.
and directly attaching him to Trump and scare the bejesus out of independents or get Democrats back in line. Like, don't vote for the recall because you're going to get a Trumper in line or get a Trumper into Sacramento. And other candidates like a Kevin Faulconer or Kevin Kiley, they couldn't really attach Trump to them. So
Right.
that's why
Yes.
you could see the polls were very close when those candidates were running, because they were mostly focused on, we're just here to talk about California problems. And we
Right.
don't really care about Trump. Trump's not relevant here in California right now. He's not president. We don't really care. But once Larry Elder jumped in, that was the candidate, for better or for worse, that the Newsom team was waiting for to then attach and roll out the boogeyman scare tactic card of Trump.
Yeah, and we had Kevin Kiley on the show, and he did mention, he's trying to just stay in the vein of talking about news in California. When I was prepping for that interview, actually, I saw one of those interviews of his on local media saying, I'm not really talking about Trump. This is not a Trump race. And a
Mhm.
lot of people on the right, especially, were very happy Larry Elder jumped in because they thought it gave them the best chance. But maybe a lesson to be learned here is, if you want to win in California, Trump may not be your ticket into doing that. And we've sort of seen that equal out now. And going into 2022 and midterms, obviously California has quite a few races that'll be involved there. Our House Minority Leader is from California. Do you think that the California GOP is prepared to really wage a big battle in midterms to try to win people back, to run against the vaccine mandates, or at least discuss them? Or is it sort of a lame duck state party at this point?
The problem with the California GOP, and I should say I have plenty of issues with the California GOP, and anybody who tunes into my program will probably find out I actually call out the California GOP more than I call out the left, because I think they could do a lot better. And I think they're not doing what they need to be doing. I think their messaging is all wrong. They have no platform. You can't just be the party of the contrarian. You can't just say, well, we're not Democrats and we're not Gavin Newsom. And look at how crazy Gavin Newsom is raising our gas taxes and taxes on property and gender neutral, this, that, and the
Yes.
other thing. You can't just be a contrarian party. You have to have a party that has a platform that offers people solutions. And the California GOP rarely comes up with those solutions. They simply just go, well, we don't want this, we don't want this, and we want to
Mhm.
take this away from you. And most of the time, people don't vote for a candidate, especially here in California, when you have so many independents and Democrats and possible moderate Democrats who would be interested in a new type of message, who want to know that they're voting to get something, to get
Right.
solutions. And I think the California GOP needs to work on better solutions and better messaging. Two areas that I think, if I were the head of the GOP right now, I would be working to completely reach out to the Latino community here in California.
Mhm.
I think, how are you missing this entire group that is aligned more with your party and your values, but you're not getting the messaging out? And there's just some of those issues that they're not getting the messaging out. They don't have a strong platform. And their issue is always, let's get people in Congress. Congress is
Right.
fine to me.
Right.
I you can send someone to Congress, but if someone says, well, I'm going to fix this part of California by going to Congress, they're sort of lying to you, because that means, one, they have to go there and get some sort of pork that they got to bring back, more spending from the federal government to bring back. When in
Mhm.
reality, if you want to fix things here on the ground in California, you got to worry about your state assembly person, you got to worry about your state senator, your county supervisors, your city council. Those are the people who are going to fix the problems here, not Congress. And I know a lot of people who are running for Congress. I'm really close friends with them. I support them. I hope they do really well. But in terms of fixing and turning around California, it comes down to the local politics. And California needs to go all in on those grassroots, those local politics, like we were mentioning, to start slowly creating the grassroots bench of politics and players who can then rise up through the ranks and eventually get higher office.
And I think that's an important point. Local politics really is what governs America, aside from the big decision items. Even when it came down to COVID restrictions, there were some areas that had conservative local leaders and some areas that had liberal local leaders, and they handled things very differently. And just because I know you're a lawyer, to get in the weeds a little bit, there are a lot of legal challenges against the vaccine mandates, against mask mandates, against a lot of the things that Newsom has signed in through executive order, and now there's been legislation about. Do you think any of those legal challenges will hold any water? Will it shut down his efforts? Because a lot of conservatives, I think, maybe could be just naively banking on knowing it's unconstitutional, but it still might happen because it's California.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say like a cop out answer because people do ask me this question all the time as I practice constitutional law. Is we're really in the wild west of constitutional law right now.
Right.
This is so new that precedence is being set every single day. We're waiting for a new court ruling, a ruling on a preliminary injunction, anything that us constitutional attorneys can kind of glean from a judge's perspective. And it's so hard to get that in a full context. Like we could sit here and talk about it, and I could say in theory this is unconstitutional. The state has no power to do this, but we found out, and Biden has said this himself, he doesn't care about whether it's constitutional or not, even if
Right.
they know, even if all his constitutional attorneys are saying this is not constitutional, like the CDC eviction moratorium. He
Right.
knows it's unconstitutional, or at
Yeah.
least people tell him it's unconstitutional. I don't even know he knows where he is most of the time, but they're telling him it's unconstitutional. He knows, as long as I get it out there, by the time it gets through the courts, my goal will already be accomplished. And
Mhm.
that's what I fear, is that a lot of these politicians are just enacted in these policies, and they're just kind of saying, well, by the time you stop us, it's already going to be out there. It's already going to, the damage will already be done. Like, for example, here in San Diego, there was a resolution passed by Supervisor Nathan Fletcher, who is one of the biggest bullies in politics that I've ever seen, not only in California politics, just in politics in general. The resolution is set for the county to combat misinformation, like on online, or people's talking about misinformation about COVID. Now, what the resolution doesn't tell you is, what is the misinformation? What do they categorize as
Right.
misinformation? And the issue is that that is so blatantly a violation of the First Amendment from the government's perspective, that everybody knows, hey, it's a violation of the First Amendment, but it's already out there, and they've already done it, and they're already starting to do it. And it's become like, again, it, going back to when we started talking, it's the canary in the coal mine. They start small. Let's see how it works on a county level. Oh, it works on the county level. Now let's go up to the state level. Works on a state level. Awesome. Now let's do it across the country. Now they have this rationale to combat misinformation online or wherever they see it. Basically, an Orwellian sort of, well, it's wrong thing to say these things, and we now have laws in place to stop it. And this is why these issues occur. So hopefully it will be stopped. This resolution will be stopped at the county level through the courts, and sort of made an example of, and say, nope, that you can't do this anymore, and stop it from going any further. But in terms of constitutionally, litigation wise, where it's going to go, it's really just a wild west, and I'm staying on top of it every single time. There are some good judges here in California, local judges, state judges, some federal judges, who will push back on this stuff. Hopefully we get some wins, because once you get that precedence, you then go ahead and you can start to argue in subsequent cases and say, this is what this judge, this is what this court ruled in this case. Let's keep moving forward down that line.
I think that's important information because a lot of times as well, people think, well, it's California, there are no good judges. There's nobody in that system who, even if they're a liberal, is just a constitutionalist, because you can have liberals, classical liberals who adhere to the Constitution, even people on the far left who adhere to the Constitution when it comes down to issuing rulings. So just sort
Mhm.
of in closing, because like you said, California is the canary in the coal mine for so many of these policies and further policies in the past, what should people be paying attention to that's happening in California that they may not be aware of, that could be coming nationwide in terms of policies that Gavin Newsom's pushing, or your state assembly is pushing, even local leaders?
Well, I definitely say coming up next legislative session, they're going to try and revamp that vaccine mandate on private employers. They're going to try and get that passed and see what happens. So definitely keep an eye on that. That's legislation that, if it works here in California, believe me, the federal government and the Biden administration is going to try and figure out how to implement it on a federal level across all the states, which will then create a whole bunch of litigation battles from state attorney generals. The misinformation, that's another one, kind of controlling the narrative, controlling information online. That's going to be a big one. It's already happening here in San Diego County. They're trying to get it through on the state level. So keep an eye on misinformation and how they're going to really start cracking down and punishing people for spreading what they call misinformation, or in my words, like wrong think. And a lot of these social issues, a lot of these wedge social issues start here in California. They're not necessarily issues where they wrap it all in a nice bow and they say, oh, it's for inclusivity. It's so that we learn, and we all get along and understand each other much better. I'm all for that. I think I'm a big history buff. I think we should learn all sorts of history. But I think when you get to issues like this ethnic studies, all the bigotry is aimed the groups that they name. So there's like 15 groups of who were suffered from bigotry throughout American history. Of course, the one group are Europeans, white Europeans, anything like that. I'm an Italian American.
Me
One
too.
fact that people don't really understand that I try and tell people, little history fact for you, is that the largest mass lynching in American history was of Italian Americans. It was 12 Italian Americans at once. And most people are shocked at that. They're like, wait, what? And I say, yeah, in New Orleans, there was a mass lynching of Italian Americans. My point being is that every group has experienced some sort of bigotry, some sort of hate. But in the end, we've all come together and made this great experiment of America work. But I think a lot of these issues, these wedge issues, has really become white man evil, white European descendants evil, white women evil, all that. And they're just trying to create these wedges of you're the bad guy, I'm the good guy, and therefore we get to do whatever we want to you. So the cultural wedge issues like that seem to be a big thing in California. Hopefully it stops here in California. I don't think it's going to spread to places like Texas or Florida. I don't think that's ever going to really happen in the near future, but keep an eye on cultural stuff like that.
I think that's good advice. And a lot of people, even who are plugged into politics, may not know that there's a vaccine mandate for kids to go back to school now in California. So if you don't know that, you probably don't know a lot of the other things you mentioned. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people follow you on social media to keep up with you and listen to your podcast?
So my most active place is on Instagram, California Underground, just all one word. And then my podcast, which is California Underground, you can search on Spotify, Apple, Google, all those places you find podcasts, like, subscribe, review, all that stuff. And thank you for having me on.
Perfect. And we'll link all that below. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks.